From the EWTN radio and television studios, this is EWTN Theology Roundtable, a conversation with the experts of EWTN's Department of Theology. Got questions about the liturgy, scripture, or tradition? They have the answers. Now, EWTN Theology Roundtable.
We're so glad you are joining us from the studios of EWTN Radio. Welcome to Theology Roundtable. Elena Rodriguez here. I'm about to introduce our panelist and our host, Colin Donavan. We're going to be talking today about the just war theory. And we're going to be giving out the numbers because one of the new things about this new format on EWTN Theology Roundtable is that we're going to be taking your calls live. This is going live on radio, on EWTN Radio. So you can call in and participate and talk to our panelist and our host, Colin Donavan. Colin, thank you very much for joining us. You as the head of the theology department and definitely leading this effort. This show has been on the air for a number of years already. We're just switching formats now.
That's right. We did actually 43 episodes as a television production. And so that was always just to tape, and then it aired on TV. And now we're doing it as a radio production live, and it's still going to tape, and it's still going to be on TV in its old time spot. So you'll be able to hear the podcast on the website, or you'll be able to watch it a week from Sunday in its usual 10 p.m. Eastern time spot. So we're excited about this. We have a little bit smaller crew because we have a little bit smaller studio. But it's going to be fun nonetheless, and it's going to be fun because it's interactive and with our audience, and that's always great. It's in my open line spot, so this is a very familiar place to be on Friday afternoons for me.
So we're switching from open line to still an open line theology roundtable.
Exactly.
Very good. Well, we are very delighted to welcome our panelists for the show. Tom Nash, advisor, Theology, EWTN Theology Department. Welcome.
Thank you, Elena. Good to be here with everyone.
And Noah Lett, also advisor for the EWTN Theology Department. Noah, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
I want to give out those numbers because we have opened our lines and you can call in and participate. We are going to be talking about the just war theory, which, of course, Colin and the panelists are going to be discussing much more deeply in the next few minutes. But while they discuss that, you may want to jot that number down and be able to call in with your questions. What does the church teach about the just war? What is the just war theory? We're not going to be talking about how to resolve the fate of the world at this point. Of course, the news item right now is the ISIS crisis, but we don't want to resolve that particular geopolitical crisis. We're talking about what the church teaches. How and when when is it justifiable to defend yourself from terrorism? From when do you use military force? The numbers. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say that that's quite right, and you could say that this, certainly the ISIS situation and things which, for instance, the Pope said about that, especially in his interview on the plane coming back from Korea, sort of highlights the situation we're in today.
So our numbers are, and they are open now, 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. If you live outside the United States and Canada, we have a number for you, 1-205-271-2985. That international number again is 1-205-271-2985. We're waiting to hear from you. Colin.
Yeah, as I noted, the Pope, when he came back from Korea, he made some comments. It was actually a question asked by our EWTN's own reporter, Alan Holdren, and he asked about what the Pope thought of the American bombing of ISIS. What had happened was the United States had bombed the Islamicists that were attacking the mountain where this actually an Islamic minority group was trying to defend itself, considered heretics by the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL as it's sometimes called. And his response, I think, has provoked a lot of controversy and really quite unnecessarily. I think for many people it's quite an obvious thing that we have to do something about this situation. The Catholic patriarchs in the Middle East have said as much. Vatican spokesmen have said that. But the Pope was not jumping into the pro and con, let's bomb ISIL debate. What he did, as you go through what he said, is very carefully stating what the Catholic teaching is, as found in the Catechism, as found in the Compendium of Catholic Social Doctrine, which is sort of the social teaching catechism. And when you look at that, you see that he was simply giving us the principles by which we can make a judgment regarding, in this particular case, does it justify military force? And so that was what he said. Now, we want to start out in sort of our little teaching segment here by quoting just the first line of the answer of what he said. He said, "In these cases where there is an unjust aggression, I can only say that it is licit to stop the unjust aggressor." So just stopping with that, and we'll get to the rest of what he said a little later. The Pope went on to explain a little bit further some of the Catholic teaching, and some might consider, well, it's naive. He just should have said, well, the Americans need to go in and bomb it. But the Pope does not give political advice so much as he may give theological advice. He may give cautions, as John Paul II did, regarding actually going into and saving minorities in Bosnia, but as opposed to the Iraq War, where he took a different kind of position. So the popes may do that, but primarily they want to teach us the principles because it's the civil authorities that will ultimately have to decide. And so when it comes to whether a particular response to aggression, whether of ISIL or any other situation, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, or others, we have to look at what would constitute a morally good response. And there are three elements in Catholic teaching to a morally good act. Any moral act that we can posit, that we can do, must have these elements. The object, the thing we want to do, must itself be good. It can't be, on its face immoral. Our intention must be good. Now, human intentions are often mixed, but I think the predominant intention there for something, must clearly be good. And the circumstances that surround it. Is this the fitting response in these circumstances? And so those are the questions that have to be asked. And I think before our break, we maybe have only time to take one of these. The first one, Tom. The object, the Pope says it's licit to stop an aggressor. Tell us a little bit more about the idea of the object of a moral act.
The object is the object toward which the will is directed. That must be good. And so it's the action in and of itself. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about stopping a threat, not just a threat, but in fact something that is lethal. They're killing people, Christians, non-Christians, who they oppose. And so it's stopping that grave threat, that grave action, so as to save these people, and also for the good of stopping them from doing more evil that they'll have to answer for.
And I guess maybe we have a little time to do the second element, and that is the intention must be good. Elaborate on that a little bit, Noah.
Well, you must intend to do justice, and you must correct vice, restore justice, restrain evil. You must not intend to do evil as your first act, but to do good, because the first act of all things is to do good and not evil. And so your intention must be to do that. Who knows whether that'll happen, but your intention must be to do it.
So the Pope has said it's morally licit to have as your object stopping the aggressor.
Yes.
It is obviously a good thing to stop it for various purposes, such as to defend those who can't defend themselves. And as we'll see, he also alludes to the fact that it's for the good even of the aggressor to have the evil which they're doing brought to an end.
Yeah, certainly it's the case. The intention, these things might sound strange to people and think of them as naive, but unless we act justly, we will only perpetuate violence. And the Church does not want us to do that.
And continue on down the road doing that as well. The third element is the circumstances, which to be licit, the use of force must comply with all of these. And you can find them, for instance, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, or as I noted, the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. And we can go specifically to a couple things the Pope said. He said, in stopping the unjust aggressor, it is a right that humanity has, and also a right of the aggressor to be stopped so he doesn't do evil. That's the intention, why we would be doing it. And regarding the circumstances, he said, I don't say to bomb or make war, but stop it. In other words, he's not telling particular governments, okay, here is how you stop it. You have to stop it. That's licit. The question of the means, he goes on to say, the means with which it can be stopped should be evaluated. To stop the unjust aggressor is licit. So he's saying the circumstantial means, the methods used, must, of course, be moral in and of themselves, but that is a question of the means. To stop the aggressor, which is the thing he said, which some people said, well, you just bomb them. That may be the means that is chosen, but that's not what the Pope was saying. He was laying out these Catholic principles and doing it rather well, I think, when you look at it at this kind of depth. He gives the four traditional conditions or circumstances which need to be met for a just war. That is, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. In other words, it can't be a disproportion between your action to respond to the aggression and what they did. If they do something grave and it's continuing, then obviously that demands a grave and continuing response. Other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. I don't think he's saying you necessarily have to try what is clearly an impractical and effective means. Well, let's try dropping water balloons on them, see if that'll work. People, we know that's not going to work. Yeah. But you have to at least rule out the lesser means by some methodology, by some reasonable thought. The third one, there must be a serious prospect of success. Well, why would you go into it without the prospect of success? You want it to achieve its purpose. And the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. So this regards also the means that are used to stop the aggressor. So the Pope was basically talking about the act is good to stop the aggressor, the intentions to do it for the sake of the innocent and also for the sake of the aggressor, that's good. But then we evaluate the means, the circumstantial things which would complete the goodness of this act of defending the innocent and those who can't defend themselves.
So the Church has actually given a lot of thought to this over the centuries because humanity has given a lot of thought to war. And so
yes, virtually almost 2 millennia has gone into the thinking that has led to this doctrine.
And we're going to continue to talk about the just war theory. What is the Church teaching, and when is it licit to use military force to fight terrorism? Your questions right here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. We'll be right back after this message.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable. on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
Thank you for joining us. If you are just now joining us on EWTN Radio, this is Theology Roundtable, EWTN Theology Roundtable. In this very special occasion today, taking the spot of Open Line, our host is still Colin Donavan, and he's the Vice President of the Theology Department. At 17 minutes past the hour, we continue our conversation about the just war theory. What does the church teach, and when is it licit or not to use military force to fight a greater evil? So before the break, we were talking about the three conditions that the church teaches where it is licit to use military force to defend yourself from a common enemy. And Colin Donavan, Tom Nash, and Noah Lett were sharing that from the church's perspective. We also have calls, and they're beginning to come in. If you want to join our conversation, you certainly may, and we invite you to do that. The number is 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. If you live outside the United States or Canada, the number is 1-205-271-2985. That international number again is 1-205-271-2985. This show is airing live on EWTN Radio. Let's go ahead, Colin, and take our first caller of the day.
Very good.
Bill is listening in Westchester, Ohio on FM 89.5. Bill, welcome to EWTN Theology Roundtable.
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
Let's see. Well, thank you for taking my call, and maybe just a quick a statement and then a question. I think it was the great father, John Sheehan, that said, before Israel, America had no enemies in the Middle East. It appears to me that much of this is a continuation of the war that started based on lies in Iraq, the invasion and occupation of Iraq, which, as reported by Reuters, a lot of Iraq's oil is pumping into Haifa, Israel. And it seems to me that this is just a continuation because we armed, trained, and funded ISIS along with the Israeli Mossad, and now the tiger we thought we had by the tail is turning into a tiger. Voila, big surprise there. Secondly, I'm almost ashamed to call myself Catholic if this is the position that you and other Catholics hold, and even the Pope. This is insane, folks, and I'm just ashamed to hear this position that you are taking.
Well, first of all, we did not
Bill.
take any position. As we pointed out, this is a general discussion of just war in the context of the ISIS situation. These are the principles that would apply whether what you said is true, which that's not the point of this program to argue that. We have a circumstance in history in the world, regardless of what happened, if to make every practical decision in the world, we must drag up all of our ideas of conspiracy or actual problems that have arisen in history, and on the basis of, well, we're not going to help them because of this. Firemen would not rush into burning buildings. Police would not go in with their guns drawn into places where robberies and murders are taking place. Everything would be a political calculus. This has to be a moral calculus. If the Christians in Mosul, if the Kurds in Erbil, and if others who have the inability to defend themselves, the church is saying, irrespective of those other considerations, for which they have no connection and no moral responsibility for, even if what you said was true, if we simply say, let the house burn to the ground, let the murderers and thieves and others destroy as they will, then what kind of Christians are we? If it's just a calculus of goods and evils, it's the evil of consequentialism, which the Pope has destroyed. Pope John Paul II, in his great encyclical on the splendor of truth, moral theology encyclical, said was wrong. That's not how we make our moral calculus as Christians. We apply these principles in the cases, in the present circumstances.
And if you want to criticize U.S. foreign policy, we don't have to go there in a long detail, but just to say, take it as a given, well, if we're not going to go in there and at least try to help out a situation which we in some sense contributed because of the destabilization of Iraq, then we have a grave sin of omission by just standing back, as you say, and watching the fire burn. And to say that is unjust is itself gravely wrong. To do nothing would be gravely wrong, in fact.
You have to look at it from that perspective. This is not about the policy of Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama, whatever those policies are, or
going back to 48 in Israel.
This is not about that. This is about, for instance, just a couple of days ago, we had in Washington, D.C., 6 patriarchs, Catholic and Orthodox, from the Middle East, who wanted to know what the United States could do to help their people. Squeeze between Islam and the Islamicists, and in a sense Israel as well. Because on the one hand, as Arabs, there's suspicion of them on the part of Israel, and on the other hand, as Christians, there's suspicion of them on part of Muslims generally in that part of the world, and hatred on the part of Islamists. So this is about what can we do to help them who are very quickly being destroyed and run out. But again, the point of the program is that the church has, as she does in most things, moral principles and teachings that can be applied in these circumstances, as in all other historical circumstances of war and peace, that have to be applied for it to be a morally good act. And that will judge some acts of history in a negative way, and it may approve some acts of history in a partial way, and disapprove certain means and actions that were used, whether it was in World War II or wherever. People will pay. People will answer to God for those. We have to answer to our neighbors and to God for what is decided today. Whatever that decision is the decision it's too messy a situation to go over there, that's a political decision. That's a military decision. But the moral law remains, regardless of who is making the decision and whatever decision they make. And they may not answer to the electorate for it, but they will answer to God for it.
And to be very clear, we are very much concerned, as is the Pope, about the Christians in Gaza and the Holy Land in general, contrary to what the caller may think.
And we may have many more examples in history where it comes to a point where you have to pick and choose and take action. The point is not the example in history, but what the church is teaching, since we clarified that from the very beginning.
Dealing with the present situation.
Right, and we are talking about this topic because of the present situation, but the main theme is what the church is teaching.
I think we have here an example of what the church is really about. The Pope steps in, risking being called what the caller called him. The church always is stepping in and saying, do good, when other people say, oh, we don't want to do good here because it's got all these roots to it and all these ancillary things, so until those things are taken care of, we're not going to do good. The church, the Pope, shows his moral leadership to step into a situation and risk being called names. And all he did was what? Do good and not evil. I'm glad to be a Catholic, and I hope to be till I die.
Amen, brother.
Thank you very much, Noah. I think all of us here are very proud to be Catholics. Well, it's about 1 minute before we take a break, so I want to ask Mark, who is holding there in Denton, Texas, to please wait. We'll come and take your question at the other end of this break we're about to take. We want to invite you to call in and talk to us. What are your comments? What are your questions about what the church teaches regarding the just war theory, as Colin, Donavan, Noah, Lett, and Tom Nash have detailed in the first half of the show? I can't believe it. We're already done through with the first.
Time flies.
Time flies. But we are going to take this break, and when we come back, we'll continue talking about these topics. You're listening to EWTN Theology Roundtable. Live on EWTN Radio. This show will later air on EWTN television as well. And in the future, it will be webcasted. So many ways to watch EWTN Theology Roundtable. Please stay tuned. We will be right back after these messages.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
We're delighted that you're joining us for EWTN Theology Roundtable. 29 minutes past the hour. Elena Rodriguez here, moderating the show today with our host, Colin Donavan, Vice President of the EWTN Theology Department, and theology advisors Tom Nash and Noah Lett, talking today about the just war theory. What does the church teach about when is it licit, when is it moral, when is it justified to use military force to combat a common enemy? And we have had callers participating in the show during the first half. We're going to continue to have callers. The number for you to call in, this show is live on EWTN Radio, is 1-800-585-9396. That number again for you to call us is 1-800-585-9396. And also, if you are listening outside the United States or Canada, the number is 1-205-271-2985. That international number is 1-205-271-2985. So, Colin, let's go ahead and take our caller, Mark, who has been waiting there very patiently in Denton, Texas, listening on AM 910. Mark, welcome to EWTN Theology Roundtable. What is your question?
Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
If you'll permit me two very simple questions. You probably can answer both quickly. The one you may have already answered when I was on call with the call screener, but you mentioned to do a good act, you have to have a good object, good intentions, and good circumstances.
Correct.
Question, are you equating circumstances with the means by which you are performing a good act, or are those two things distinct?
If your object is to stop the aggressor, which is the objective, then obviously there are very many means. Some of this is answered by the Pope, and let me read a little bit of what he says. He said that after having said the means by which it can be stopped should be evaluated, he says we have to have memory as well. How many times under this excuse of stopping the unjust aggressor, the powers have taken control of nations and they have made a true war of conquest. That's something else that we see in history. A single nation cannot judge how to stop this, how you stop an unjust aggressor. After the Second World War, there was an idea of the United Nations. It must be discussed there and said there's an unjust aggressor, so how do we stop it? There he's talking about the part of the decision-making process regarding the means. And this would apply, whether you think the UN is a good thing or a bad thing. The point is, for instance, in our American system, international treaties are the highest law of the land. Our Constitution says that, so we have even a constitutional obligation to at least refer to those before we act. So you could say that that's part of the decision making. And then he goes on to talk about, of course, the minorities themselves and how stopping the aggressor is a right that humanity has, but it's also a right of the aggressor to be stopped so he doesn't do evil. So anything up to and including the use of force, whether it's a war in some strict sense or a police action was used euphemistically in the past sometimes, any use of force under whatever name is obviously a means to stopping the aggressor, and it becomes proportionate to the degree that it's reasonable to do that in a particular circumstance. And I think a lot of people also don't understand that with everything we do in life, whether it's the work that we do or initiating military action, we have to answer for the prudence of that decision. And
so circumstances are inclusive in?
They're inclusive of the means.
Exactly.
They're inclusive of the lesser means as well as the more serious means, such as using force. And so I have here a list of the things which the parts of prudence that St. Thomas Aquinas has in the second part of the Summa, question 49. To be perfect, prudence must involve memory concerning the experience of applicable things, understanding the right estimate of the particular object, docility, a willingness to be taught by those with more understanding or experience, shrewdness, in other words, sort of a quickness and adeptness at coming to a judgment, reason, making apt use of this power God gave us to not act emotionally or any other way, but to use our reason to get to the conclusion, foresight regarding, what might be the consequences of this and how do I forestall those or avoid those, circumspection regarding the situation today, exactly, who's doing what to whom and what's going to happen when we jump in there, caution, and that is in making sure that the means that we use are good and not evil, and so on and so forth. So a prudent act doesn't necessarily mean a painstakingly slow decision, doesn't also mean a rapid, hasty decision. It means the best and most perfect decision that will achieve the consequences. Sometimes we think the prudent thing to do is to go blow in on people to kingdom come. That could be hasty and precipitous if it produces greater evils.
And it could be an evil itself. I mean, that's where circumstances can change the object. Like, well, we blew up Iraq and we blew up Syria and we killed all the Christians too, but boy, we got them, didn't we? Well, we've done a grave evil because we've totally annihilated everybody.
Well, we're reminded of Lamech in the beginning in Genesis, who threatened 7 times more violence to somebody than was done to him. The questioner's question was about circumstances. The present activities of the aggressor determine how you can respond, because you have to respond sufficiently enough to stop him, but don't do greater evil than they're doing. And so Lamech here in the beginning in Genesis is promising 7 times more than was done to him. And what was the result of that? Violence upon violence upon violence. So the circumstances, evolving and dynamic and developing, have to be looked at by you to see how much force you can apply to achieve your goal, which is to stop the doing of evil. Is that right?
Yes, and like you're saying, if you increase it or you increase the conflagration, so to speak, then you're just adding flames to the fire, figuratively and literally. Not good.
And the same principle is used by police departments. There has to be proportional force. Yeah. If you use disproportional force, you violate people's civil rights or you do greater damage or innocent parties get. So these are always the kinds of questions that any public authority, the public authority gets to make. The policeman on the beat doesn't consult his confessor before he makes a prudent judgment as to how to respond. But if his conscience is properly informed and he's following the ethics of his profession, he should make a good judgment if he's diligent. That's all the Pope is asking.
And if he's disproportionate, if he's unjust, hypothetically, possibly, concretely, he could elicit a riot.
Right,
That,
could
and that,
produce
would that make
even
it worse?
greater consequences than he could imagine.
So in other words, the end does not justify the means.
There it is.
No, even a good end. I think there's an element too, Noah, which I know you've looked at, and that is the church has a real bias in favor of peace. For the there's the expression "unleash the dogs of war." Well, the dogs of war are quite vicious,
yes.
And so you can have a good intention and unleash those and get all kinds of consequences. Pope Benedict was a big proponent of the idea that there's a special relationship between peace and Christ and Christianity, and expounded
this
that.
is in the second book, Jesus of Nazareth, in the second chapter, it's divided into 3 parts. He talks about the question of the violence that the Jews perpetrated, that the Jews did in 70 AD. The temple was destroyed. The zealots were joined with the priest in an act to try to defend Israel against the Romans. The result was the temple was destroyed, as we all know, and he raises the question, well, why didn't the Christians fight? Because it's known for a fact that the Christians didn't fight. It's not because they were pacifists. It's rather because they understood that Christ was the new temple and not the building was the temple any longer, and that meant that zeal now was directed towards sharing Christ, as opposed to standing there like Judas Maccabeus did and his brothers did in the book of Maccabees to defend the Jews against the Greeks. Okay? And so the point is that the Christians understand that we must have zeal to share Christ and not the zeal to stand up and take arms like was done to defend the temple at the time. How does this apply today? It applies in that how do we want to spread peace? We spread peace by evangelizing. We must tell people about Jesus Christ again and again and again. We must not wait for our bishops. We don't have to wait for the Pope. We don't have to wait for a program. We don't have to wait for a religious leader. It comes with baptism. You have Christ to share.
And they've
bring
already,
peace to the world.
And all of the bishops, popes encourage us anyway, so we can be safe assured that we're going with their blessing.
And he's the Prince of Peace. I think I had a wonderful professor at the Angelicum who was a patristics expert, who went over this territory and explained how the church, which was, I hate to almost use the word pacifistic, but during the Roman imperial period, it understood that the injustices afflicted by imperial officials, while they had the authority, obey Caesar, but render to God what is God's, render to Caesar, they had the authority to conscript men, including Christians or converts to Christianity. And he encouraged, like the centurion and the church encouraged people in the Roman legions to be, to not to be barbarous, not to rape and pillage and do these things, but to be carry out the duties that are given them.
Keep the civil order.
Keep the civil order. But it discouraged, in fact, you could not be an official of the army or the government who had to execute capital punishment, because the order itself of the society was disordered, the legal order. Yeah. Once that legal order began to change and be influenced by the church, the idea of the just war was developed, because clearly now you have the possibility of a morally just order which now needs to be defended.
Yes, right. That's right.
And so it's in defending that. But I think always keeping this idea of peace, the Prince of Peace, after all, is the source of it. That would be our motive for the bias in favor of peace, even though we all, well, like Peter, we have the sword for the absolutely necessary use of force when that is the only thing that remains. That, I think, is what the church is trying to say.
And we're going to take a quick break, and we ask Sam, who's waiting there patiently, to please hold on the line. We'll take your call on the other side of this break here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. And also Sergeant Robert, looking forward to talking to you, gentlemen, and also you. 1-800-585-9396 is the number to call. 1-800-585-9396. We'll be right back after a moment.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
43 minutes past the hour. Elena Rodriguez here, giving you a very warm welcome if you just tuned in to our special and live EWTN broadcast of EWTN Theology Roundtable today in the same spot as Open Line with Colin Donavan. Because Colin Donavan is a host of our show, we are speaking today about the just war theory. The just war theory, what does the church teach? When is it licit? When is it moral to use military force to defend a nation from a common enemy? We've had very interesting calls, and Colin, if you think we should go to the next call, I think Sam is ready there.
Yeah, ready to go.
He's listening in Columbus, Ohio on AM 820. Sam, welcome to EWTN Theology Roundtable. What is your question?
Well, my question is this. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, and the just war teaching of our church has become very interesting to me, unfortunately now that I am retired. But my understanding is that the church has the ability to say that a war is just, and they have done that in the past. Mm-hmm. And that every war can really only have one side to be just. I mean, if you take the just war teachings and its structure, it's very, very restricted. So only one side could possibly, even potentially, be just, and very few of one side could be just. Mm-hmm. So there should be a vast number of instances where the church said, this war is unjust. Christians, if you participate, you will be committing murder, and that's mortal sin. Mm-hmm. But looking through history, I have never been able to find in the 1700 years of the just war teaching that the men of the church within a boundary have said before or during a war. Now, afterwards, there's always some reticence about, oh boy, what did we do? But before and during, never has the church said unjust. how can 1,700 years be?
Well, I think
wrong?
it goes down to one of the statements in the Catechism, right after the giving the four conditions, and because of the modern means of destruction, says that should weigh heavily in evaluating the conditions. It then concludes by saying the evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgments of those who have the responsibility for the common good. So you do go back to the gospel principle, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, render to God what is God. And so the moral leadership, the church is never going to say, and it didn't say to the people of Germany, although clearly during the Second World War, the Pope is said to have sort of encouraged the Catholic aristocrats in the German Luftwaffe and other services who plotted to assassinate Hitler, essentially under the guise of international authority that this was carrying out, would bring about the end of the war. So it's not that those decisions could not be made. I think it's that the church has never felt that it was necessary to do that. I think there are strong hints on the part of Catholic leaders today, maybe not so much by the Pope, but a Vatican official recently made some very strong statements about what is going on in Iraq, the patriarchs there, about the suffering of their peoples. That's the kind of thing, because the church can't judge the consciences of the political leaders. It can judge, obviously, certain things that are patent, and I think it does. I think in the case of the Iraq War, John Paul II sort of doubted the sufficiency of the arguments in favor of it, but he didn't call the president immoral or the soldiers who fought in the... No, that's not what the church has done, any more than Christ told the centurion, man, lay down your arms and run for the hills. You're in an evil organization that's doing evil and going around raping and pillaging across the... He didn't do that. Yes. He, as you know, it said early, evangelize, convert the heart and you will convert the empire. And that's actually what happened historically. So I think that's the reason. The judgment of the sufficiency of the prudential decision of a president, prime minister, king, or whomever will be God's. And I think the church generally has not taken upon itself the responsibility of making that judgment in a public forum. That's not its... Now, perhaps in the confessional, and we would hope confessors have cautioned Catholic leaders that you should, be careful. Your salvation too may be dependent upon this decision to do this, that, or the other thing. But no, in the public forum, that simply wasn't Christ's way. It's not been the way of the church as well.
Quite thought, I think, that with regard to Pius XII, there was Mitbrennender Sorge, which was clearly opposing the Germans before the war began, 1937. And then his first, I think it's Summi Pontificatus, 1939, just after the war started, it's making clear that they're opposing what Hitler's doing. And also that you want to be too inflammatory so as to not jeopardize needlessly all the innocent Christians that are in Germany as well as elsewhere. So again, trying not to fan the flames because, boy, you can be really right. Well, the Dutch bishops learned that when they spoke out so strongly, and that's what exacerbated a situation, and many more people, including Catholics as well as converts from Judaism, died. So there's a very good point about also when you're in the middle of it as opposed to sitting back and on the sideline and you're across the sea in the United States, you have to realize that certain statements can add and exacerbate a situation greatly.
And I think that's the prudence of the church, that her statements generally have a pastoral view to the conversion of hearts and not a political or military prudential view, which it leaves to the civil authorities.
A question for you. So if I'm a soldier and I'm in World War II and I'm on the Allies side and I'm thinking maybe I'm doing something wrong because the Pope hasn't come out and said this is a just war, should I have a troubled heart?
You don't. That's not going to happen. you fulfill the duty to your country, whatever that requires. And German soldiers during World War II, I actually, when I was studying in Rome, I met a priest who had served in the Luftwaffe. He had been a seminarian, conscripted, obviously, into the army and that. And because he was that, he found many officers in the German army and Air Force who were sort of benign in helping them, and he got into a translation and intelligence kind of position where he didn't have to man a battery or shoot the enemy or something like that. But the church wasn't telling him, his bishops were not telling him, his priests were not telling him, he wasn't ordained at this point, wasn't telling him, no, you cannot fight for the army. Meanwhile, you had bishops and cardinals in Germany who were courageous, the so-called Lion of Munster, who condemned what the Nazis were doing, but at the same time did not impugn the motives of the soldiers and others conscripted into the armies, simply carrying out orders, provided they did as our Lord had told the centurion, to be just in your execution of war. Your political decisions, leaders will bear the moral question of whether it was justified doing. You bear the question of how you use your arms and what you do and how you treat people as you're carrying out your duties and responsibilities, even shooting the enemy and stopping them.
And
52 minutes past the hour. I'm so sorry, Tom. I just want to make sure we squeeze in real quickly Sergeant Robert with his question, listening in Gainesville, Virginia. Just about 2.5 minutes to go, Sergeant.
Sure. My question is what is the church doing? And I'm personally involved in combating suicide within the soldiers and Marines that are coming back from war. I myself am an injured vet, died, saw the other side, had a large conversion. And now I find myself combating my own people within my own church who thinks we have a pacifist religion and that we should never stand up for the innocent and bear arms.
Sure, yeah. They don't know their religion. I'll tell you what you can do, Sergeant. If you go down to your library or I'm not sure what resource you would find this in, but probably online on the Vatican website and even in our own EWTN website, every time Pope John Paul II, and he would address, for instance, the NATO officers would go to Rome for a conference, or sailors would come up from Naples and be in the general audience, he was always extremely warm and positive about what they did because he saw them as peacemakers. And the church's official documents speak of those soldiers, sailors, and Marines and Coast Guardsmen and so on as being peacemakers. That's their job, that if they carry those, what they are called upon to do out morally, they will be doing that. If they do evil themselves, of course, they too will answer to God for it. So I think in the Pope's writing, especially John Paul II's, you will find a lot of material that contradicts the idea necessarily that service in the military is necessarily evil, and even that combat is evil if it's prosecuted in a moral way in conditions that themselves are moral.
And it's right there in the Catechism.
And it's in the Catechism as well.
Well, this takes us to the end of our show. We want to thank our listeners around the world, and our callers as well. We want to thank you, Tom Nash, Noah Lett, Theology Advisors with EWTN Theology Department, and of course you, Colin Donavan, hosting the show for us today as Vice President of the EWTN Theology Department. We'll have another EWTN Theology Roundtable show next month.
And I'll be back next week in this time spot with Open Line.
For EWTN Radio. Stay tuned. More to come. Solid Catholic teaching here on EWTN. Thank you for joining us.